The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of 1247 Maple Street, casting familiar shadows across the hardwood floors that Eleanor Matthews had polished countless times over for decades. At 72, she moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to make every movement count, her silver hair pinned back in the same neat bun she'd worn since her husband died 15 years ago. Eleanor stood in her kitchen, the same kitchen where she had fed 3 children breakfast before school, where she had celebrated birthdays and nursed scraped knees, where she had sat alone many nights calculating mortgage payments on a teacher's salary. The house held every memory that mattered, every sacrifice that had meaning. The coffee maker gurgled to life as she reached for her favorite mugga-chipped ceramic piece her daughter Sarah had made in high school art class. Today marked exactly 40 years and 3 months since she and Robert had signed the mortgage papers for this modest 2-story colonial in suburban Cincinnati. She could still remember the weight of that moment, the way Robert's hand had trembled slightly as he signed his name, knowing they were committing to something that would define the next half of their lives. "We'll make it work, Ellie," he had whispered that day. "Our kids will grow up here. We'll grow old here." Robert had kept his promise about growing old together, though their time had been cut shorter than they'd planned. Eleanor had kept her promise too, working double shifts at Roosevelt Elementary School, tutoring students after hours, selling homemade preserves at the farmer's market every weekend. Every extra dollar had gone toward that mortgage payment. Every sacrifice had been worth it when she finally made that last payment 3 years ago. The house was hers. Completely, entirely hers. The doorbell interrupted her morning ritual, an unexpected sound that made her frown. She wasn't expecting anyone, and her neighbors knew she preferred visitors to call first. Through the peephole, she saw a young man, in an expensive suit holding a briefcase, his perfectly styled hair gleaming in the morning light. "Mrs. Matthews," the man's smile was practiced, professional. "I'm Jason Webb from Premium Properties Real Estate. I believe your son David has been in touch with you about our meeting today." Eleanor's grip tightened on the door handle. David hadn't mentioned any meeting. In fact, she hadn't heard from her eldest son in almost 2 weeks, which wasn't entirely unusual given his busy schedule at the marketing firm downtown. But this felt wrong, the way the young man's eyes kept darting past her into the house, assessing, calculating. "I think there's been some mistake," Eleanor said carefully. "David hasn't mentioned any real estate business with me." Jason Webb's smile faltered slightly, and he consulted his phone with the urgency of someone whose commission depended on closing deals. "Let me give him a quick call. There might be some confusion about the timing." Eleanor watched as he stepped away, speaking in hushed tones into his phone. She caught fragments of the conversation, ... she doesn't seem to know, ... double quotes, and ... thought you said it was handled, ... and most unsettling of all, ... the papers are already processed, ... A chill ran down Eleanor's spine that had nothing to do with the October morning air. She backed into her house, her mind racing through possibilities, none of them good. David wouldn't. He couldn't. But even as she tried to reassure herself, she remembered the arguments they'd had lately about her living alone, about how impractical it was for her to maintain such a large house by herself. "Mom, you're being stubborn," David had said during their last conversation. "This place is too much for you. The yard work alone is going to kill you, and don't even get me started on the stairs. What happens when you can't manage them anymore?" "I'll manage them until I can't," Eleanor had replied firmly. "And when that day comes, I'll figure something out. But this is my home, David. Your father and I built a life here. Dad's been gone for 15 years. Mom, maybe it's time to let go." The memory of those words stung now as Jason Webb approached her door again, his professional smile replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "Mrs. Matthews, I'm afraid there's been a significant misunderstanding. Your son David has already completed the sale of this property. The closing was yesterday afternoon. I'm here to discuss the transition timeline and help coordinate your relocation." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She gripped the doorframe to steady herself, her vision swimming as the implications crashed over her. "That's impossible," she whispered. "This is my house. My name is on the deed. David can't sell what doesn't belong to him." Jason Webb pulled out a tablet, scrolling through documents with the efficiency of someone who had delivered this kind of news before. "According to our records, David Matthews holds power of attorney and has been listed as the primary decision-maker for this property. The sale went through Premium Properties to a cash buyer. Settlement was $340,000, which I understand is quite fair for this neighborhood." Eleanor's legs felt weak. Power of attorney. She had never signed any such document. She would never have signed such a document. The house was her security, her independence, her proof that she could survive anything life threw at her. "I need to see those papers." she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I need to see exactly what you think gives my son the right to sell my home. Of course. Jason's tone had shifted to something more cautious. I can email you copies of all the documentation. You should also know that the new owners are quite understanding about the situation. They're willing to give you 30 days to make arrangements, which is more generous than the standard 15-day notice. 30 days? 30 days to pack up 40 years of memories and find somewhere else to live on a retired teacher's pension. 30 days to accept that her son had betrayed her in the most fundamental way possible. After Jason Webb left, Eleanor sat in her living room surrounded by the furniture she and Robert had chosen together. The family photos that chronicled decades of love and loss, the books she had collected over a lifetime of teaching. Her hands shook as she dialed David's number, each ring echoing in her chest like a funeral bell. Mom, what's up? I'm in a meeting, so make it quick, David. Her voice cracked on his name. A real estate agent just left my house. He says you sold it. He says you have power of attorney. Please tell me this is some kind of mistake. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Eleanor wondered if the call had dropped. When David finally spoke, his voice carried a defensive edge that confirmed her worst fears. Mom, we talked about this. You can't keep living there alone. It's not safe, it's not practical, and frankly, it's not fair to the rest of us to worry about you all the time. We never talked about you selling my house. Eleanor's composure cracked, her voice rising to a pitch she barely recognized. How could you do this? How could you take away everything I worked for? I didn't take anything away. I'm protecting you. The money from the sale will more than cover a nice assisted living facility. You'll have security, medical care if you need it, people your own age to socialize with. It's what's best for everyone. What's best for everyone. Eleanor stood up, pacing the length of her living room like a caged animal. David, this is my home. I paid for every board, every nail, every shingle on this roof. I worked 2 jobs for years to make the mortgage payments after your father died. I haven't missed a single payment in 40 years. This house is mine. Actually, Mom, legally speaking, it's not anymore. I had lawyers make sure everything was done properly. I know you're upset now, but you'll thank me later when you're settled, somewhere safe and appropriate. The casual cruelty of his words, the way he dismissed 40 years of her life as inappropriate, sent a surge of rage through Eleanor that she hadn't felt since the day the bank had threatened foreclosure after Robert's death. How? She whispered. How do you have power of attorney? I never signed anything. Another pause. This one shorter but somehow more ominous. Do you remember when you had that bout of pneumonia 2 years ago? You were pretty out of it for a while, and I was handling all your affairs. The lawyers said it was important to have proper documentation in place in case something like that happened again. Eleanor's mind reeled. She did remember the pneumonia, remembered being weak and disoriented for weeks. She remembered David bringing her papers to sign, telling her they were medical forms and insurance documents. She had trusted him. She had signed whatever he put in front of her because he was her son, because she never imagined he would betray that trust. You tricked me, she said, the words falling into the silence like stones into deep water. You made me sign papers under false pretenses when I was sick and vulnerable. I protected you, David shot back, and I'm still protecting you. The sale is final, Mom. The new owners take possession in 30 days. I've already researched several facilities that would be perfect for you. Sunset Manor has an opening, and they have activities, group meals, even a small garden where you can. Eleanor hung up the phone. She sat in the sudden silence of her house, listening to the familiar sounds that had comforted her for decades. The gentle hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the settling creaks of old wood adjusting to the changing temperature. In 30 days, someone else would hear these sounds. Someone else would watch the morning light move across these floors. Someone else would call this place home. But Eleanor Matthews hadn't survived 40 years of mortgage payments, the death of her husband, and the challenge of raising 3 children by giving up when things got difficult. She had learned long ago that the world didn't hand you anything. You had to fight for what mattered. And this house mattered more than anything else she had left. She picked up her phone again, this time dialing a different number. Her daughter. Sarah answered on the second ring, her voice bright with the innocence of someone who didn't yet know that their family was falling apart. Hi, Mom. Perfect timing. I was just thinking about you. How are you doing? Sarah, sweetheart, I need to ask you something and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did you know that David was planning to sell the house? The silence that followed told Eleanor everything she needed to know. Mom, ... Sarah's voice was small. Guilty. He said he was going to talk to you about it first. He said it was just exploring options, not anything definite. The house sold yesterday, Sarah. A real estate agent was just here telling me I have 30 days to move out. Oh my God. Sarah's shock sounded genuine. But Eleanor had learned today that she couldn't trust her assumptions about her children. Anymore, Mom, I'm so sorry. I thought David made it sound like you were having trouble managing everything. Like maybe you wanted to downsize. I never said anything about wanting to downsize. This house is all I have left of your father. All I have left of the life we built together. How could any of you think I would want to give that up? Eleanor could hear Sarah crying now, soft sobs that carried across the phone line. I don't know, Mom. I really don't know. Michael and I, we trusted David's judgment. He handles all the business stuff for the family, and he seemed so sure that this was what you needed. Michael, her youngest son, was in on it too. All three of her children had conspired to take away the thing that mattered most to her. The betrayal cut so deep that Eleanor wondered if she would ever feel whole again. I have to go, Sarah, Eleanor said quietly. I have a lot to figure out. Mom, wait, let me help you. Let me talk to David and Michael. Maybe we can know. Eleanor's voice was firm. You've all made your position clear. I'll handle this myself. After she hung up, Eleanor walked through her house slowly, touching surfaces and objects that had anchored her life for so long. In the dining room, she ran her fingers along the table where she had helped her children with homework, where she and Robert had shared quiet dinners and planned their dreams. In the master bedroom, she stood before the window where she had watched her children play in the backyard, where she had grieved her husband's death and slowly learned to live. Without him, every room held memories that were too precious to pack into boxes and carried to some sterile, assisted living facility. Every corner held pieces of her soul that couldn't be relocated or replaced. But as the afternoon wore on and the initial shock began to fade, something harder and more determined took its place. Eleanor Matthews had not survived 40 years of challenges by accepting defeat gracefully. She had fought the bank when they tried to foreclose after Robert's death. She had fought the school district when they tried to cut funding for her special education programs. She had fought her own grief and loneliness to build a meaningful life as a widow. If her children thought she would simply roll over and accept this betrayal, they had forgotten who raised them. Eleanor went to her desk and pulled out the accordion file, where she kept all her important documents. Somewhere in these papers was the truth about what David had done and how he had done it. If he had tricked her into signing power of attorney documents when she was sick, there might be legal recourse. If he had forged her signature or misrepresented the nature of the documents, there might be criminal charges to pursue. She spread the papers across her kitchen table, putting on her reading glasses and settling in for what she knew would be a long night. Eleanor had spent 40 years learning that the most important battles were won not through anger or emotion, but through careful preparation and unwavering determination. Her son had made a critical mistake in underestimating her. He had forgotten that the woman who had raised him was not someone who gave up easily. He had forgotten that she had fought harder battles than this and won. As the sun set over 1247 Maple Street, Eleanor Matthews began planning her counterattack. She had 30 days to save her home and her dignity. She had 30 days to remind her children who they were dealing with. It would be enough. Eleanor barely slept that first night after learning about the sale. She spent hours poring over documents, making notes and trying to piece together exactly how David had managed to steal her house from under her. By dawn, she had a clearer picture of his deception, and it was worse than she had imagined. The power of attorney documents were dated during her illness, just as David had admitted, but they were far more comprehensive than simple medical directives. He had obtained broad financial power of attorney, giving him the legal right to make decisions about all her assets and property. The language was complex and dense, clearly designed to confuse someone who wasn't expecting deception from their own child. What made it even more damaging was that the documents appeared to be legitimate. David had been clever enough to have them witnessed and notarized properly, even if Eleanor could prove she hadn't understood what she was signing. Proving fraud would be difficult when the paperwork looked so official. But Eleanor had learned something important during her years as a teacher. There was always more than one way to solve a problem. At 8 o'clock sharp, she called the offices of Henderson and Associates, the law firm that had handled her mortgage and Robert's estate. Margaret Henderson had been a friend for over 2 decades. Someone Eleanor trusted to give her straight answers even when they weren't what she wanted to hear. Eleanor, honey, I heard about what happened, Margaret said as soon as she came to the phone. I have to say, I'm shocked. I never would have expected David to do something like this without at least discussing it with you first. So you knew about the sale? I knew David had consulted with some real estate attorneys about property transfers, but he made it sound like this was something you were considering together. He specifically told them you were having mobility issues and were interested in downsizing. Margaret's voice carried a note of professional embarrassment. If I had known he was proceeding without your knowledge or consent, I would have called you immediately. Eleanor felt a flicker of hope. Margaret, I need to know what my options are. Can this sale be reversed? Can I challenge the power of attorney? Come in this afternoon. Bring all the documentation you have, and we'll go through everything together. I can't make any promises, but there might be some avenues we haven't explored yet. Margaret's office hadn't changed much in the 20 years Eleanor had been visiting it. The same diplomas hung on the walls, the same law books lined the shelves. But today, the familiar space felt like a battlefield, where Eleanor's future would be decided. Margaret spread Eleanor's documents across her conference table, studying each page with the careful attention of someone who knew that details mattered. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and silver hair that she wore in a no-nonsense bob, and Eleanor had always appreciated her direct approach to difficult problems. Okay, Margaret said, after nearly an hour of review, here's what we're dealing. With the power of attorney, documents are legally valid, which means David did have the authority to sell the house. However, there are some interesting complications that might work in your favor. Eleanor leaned forward, hope rising in her chest. What kind of complications? First, power of attorney is supposed to be used in the best interests of the person who granted it. If we can demonstrate that David acted in his own interests rather than yours, we might have grounds for a challenge. Second, Ohio law requires that major financial decisions involving an elderly person's primary residence should include safeguards to prevent abuse. Margaret pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. Tell me about your current physical and mental health. Are you having any difficulties managing daily activities? Any memory issues? Any problems with mobility that might justify David's claim that you needed assisted living? None, Eleanor said firmly. I drive myself to the grocery store, to church, to my volunteer work at the literacy center. I manage all my own finances, take care of the house and yard, cook my own meals. My last physical was 3 months ago, and Dr. Patterson said I was in excellent health for my age. Good. That helps establish that you don't actually need the kind of care David claimed you did. Margaret made more notes. Now, did David benefit financially from this sale? Eleanor frowned. What do you mean? Did he keep any of the sale proceeds? Did he have any debts that might have motivated him to access your home equity? I don't know. He said the money would go toward assisted living costs, but I haven't seen any of it. I don't even know where it is right now. Margaret's expression grew more serious. Eleanor, I need to be honest with you. Even if we can prove that David abused his power of attorney, reversing a real estate sale is extremely difficult. The new buyers are innocent parties who purchased the property in good faith. Courts are very reluctant to undo those kinds of transactions. Eleanor felt her hope deflating, but Margaret held up a hand. However, that doesn't mean you're without recourse. If we can prove David acted improperly, we can sue him for damages. We can demand that he compensate you for the loss of your home, and possibly seek additional damages for emotional distress and elder abuse. But I'll still lose the house. Probably yes. But you might be able to force David to purchase you a comparable property, or at least ensure that you have enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life without being dependent on him or anyone else. Eleanor sat back in her chair, processing this information. It wasn't the complete victory she had hoped for, but it was something. At least it would prevent David from benefiting from his betrayal. There's one more thing, Margaret continued. I'd like to have a private investigator look into David's finances. If he's in debt, or if he's already spent the proceeds from your house sale, that could be evidence of self-dealing rather than acting in your best interests. How long would all of this take? Months, possibly longer. And Eleanor, I have to warn you, this is going to be expensive. Litigation always is, and family litigation can be particularly brutal. Are you prepared for a long, difficult fight with your son? Eleanor thought about the question seriously. Was she prepared to destroy her relationship with David permanently? Was she prepared to potentially alienate Sarah and Michael if they sided with their brother? Was she prepared to spend her remaining years fighting instead of trying to rebuild some kind of peace? Then she thought about the 40 years she had spent making that house a home. She thought about the promises she and Robert had made to each other about growing old there together. She thought about the casual cruelty in David's voice when he told her the sale was what's best for everyone. Yes, she said quietly. I'm prepared to fight. Margaret nodded approvingly. Good. I'll get the paperwork started today. In the meantime, I want you to document everything. Keep records of all your daily activities to prove your independence. Get a statement from Dr. Patterson about your health. Start gathering information about comparable assisted living facilities and their costs. We'll need to show that David's claims about your needs don't match reality. Eleanor left Margaret's office feeling more hopeful than she had since Jason Webb had appeared at her door. She had a plan now, and more importantly, she had an advocate who understood what David had done and was willing to fight it. Her next stop was Roosevelt Elementary School, where she had taught for 37 years. Before retiring, Principal Janet Morrison had been a colleague and friend for most of that time, and Eleanor needed allies who could speak to her competence and independence. The school looked exactly the same as it had when Eleanor left 3 years ago. Down to the cheerful bulletin boards in the hallway and the familiar smell of cleaning supplies and cafeteria food, Janet met her in the main office with a warm hug and genuine concern. "Eleanor, I heard through the grapevine about what happened with your house. I couldn't believe it when Susan told me. How are you holding up?" Susan Martinez had been Eleanor's teaching partner for over a decade, and news traveled fast in the tight-knit world of elementary education. Eleanor appreciated that people cared, but she also knew she needed to be careful about how much she shared while legal proceedings were pending. "I'm managing," Eleanor said. "Actually, that's why I'm here. I may need character references for some legal matters, people who can speak to my mental and physical capabilities. Would you be willing to provide a statement if my lawyer requests one?" "Of course," Janet said immediately. "Eleanor, you were one of the sharpest teachers I ever worked with. Even in your last year here, you were handling like it was nothing. If someone is questioning your competence, they clearly don't know you very well." Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the autumn sunshine streaming through the office windows. These people knew her. They had worked with her, depended on her, respected her judgment for decades. Their opinion of her competence carried weight that David's assumptions never could. "I'd also like to continue my volunteer work with the literacy program," Eleanor said. "In fact, I'd like to increase my hours if possible. I have some extra time on my hands." "Right now," Janet smiled. "That would be wonderful. Mrs. Chen has been asking for more help with the adult learners. And frankly, you're better at teaching reading fundamentals than most people half your age." As Eleanor left the school, she felt a sense of purpose returning that she hadn't experienced since learning about the house sale. David had made the mistake of assuming that because she was retired, she was somehow diminished. He had forgotten that retirement meant she had more time and energy to focus on what mattered, not less capability to handle challenges. Her phone rang as she was getting into her car. The caller ID showed Sarah's number, and Eleanor hesitated. Before answering, "Hi, Sarah. Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I'm so sorry. I should have asked you directly instead of just trusting David's version of what you wanted." Sarah's voice was thick with emotion. "I talked to Michael last night, and neither of us realized that David had already completed the sale. We thought this was still just an idea he was exploring." Eleanor felt some of her anger toward her younger children begin to soften. They had been foolish to trust David without verifying his claims, but they hadn't been active participants in the deception. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need a completely honest answer. Has David asked either you or Michael for money recently? Has he mentioned any financial problems?" "Well, Sarah's hesitation was telling. "He didn't ask for money exactly, but he did mention that the marketing firm was going through some rough times. He said they might be laying people off, and he was worried about his job security." "Why?" Eleanor's stomach tightened. If David was facing financial difficulties, that would explain why he needed access to her home equity quickly. It would also provide clear evidence that he had acted in his own interests rather than hers. "I'm just trying to understand his motivations," Eleanor said carefully. "Sarah, I want you to know that I've hired a lawyer to challenge the sale. This is going to get difficult, and it might get ugly. I understand if you and Michael don't want to be involved." "Mom, no. If David really did this without your permission, then what he did was wrong. Michael and I will support you however we can." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. At least she wouldn't be completely alone in this fight. That evening, Eleanor sat in her living room with a legal pad, planning her strategy for the remaining 29 days. Margaret had been clear that reversing the sale would be nearly impossible. But Eleanor had learned long ago that impossible just meant you had to be more creative in your approach. She couldn't get her house back through the courts, but there might be other ways to apply pressure. David's career in marketing depended on his reputation and professional relationships. His ability to support his own family depended on keeping his job at a time when his company was already struggling. His relationship with his siblings and extended family depended on their continued belief that he was trustworthy and honorable. Eleanor had spent 40 years teaching children, and the most important lesson she had learned was that consequences mattered more than punishment. David needed to understand the true cost of what he had done, not just to her, but to himself and everyone around him. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in months. "Hello, Robert," she said when her brother-in-law answered. "It's Eleanor. I need to talk to you about David." and I'm afraid it's not good news. Robert Matthews was a retired police detective who had never liked David's arrogance and had often worried about Eleanor's willingness to trust her eldest son's judgment. If anyone would understand the seriousness of what David had done, it would be Robert. Double quotes, Eleanor, what's wrong? You sound upset. David sold my house without my permission. He tricked me into signing power of attorney documents when I was sick, then used them to steal everything Robert and I worked for. The silence on the other end of the line was so complete that Eleanor could hear the television playing in the background of Robert's apartment. That son of a bitch, Robert finally said, his voice carrying the quiet fury of someone who had seen too much human betrayal in his career. Eleanor, please tell me you've called the police. I've hired a lawyer, but she says proving fraud will be difficult. The paperwork looks legitimate, and David was careful to follow proper procedures. Proper procedures don't matter if the intent was criminal. What your son did is called financial elder abuse, and it's a felony in Ohio. Have you filed a police report? Eleanor hadn't even considered involving law enforcement. The idea of having her son arrested seemed too extreme to final. But as Robert explained the legal definitions of elder abuse and fraud, she began to understand that David's actions went far beyond a family disagreement about her living situation. I'll talk to my lawyer about filing a police report, Eleanor said. But Robert, I need you to know that this might get complicated for the whole family. If this becomes a criminal matter, good, Robert interrupted. It should get complicated. What David did was wrong, and he needs to face real consequences. Eleanor, I've seen cases like this before. When adult children steal from their elderly parents, it's rarely a one-time thing. If he gets away with this, he'll do it again. After they hung up, Eleanor sat in the gathering darkness of her living room, thinking about Robert's words. She had been focused on getting her house back, but maybe that was thinking too small. Maybe the real issue wasn't just David's theft of her property, but his fundamental belief that he had the right to make decisions about her life without her consent. If she was going to fight this battle, she might as well fight it completely. Eleanor picked up her phone one more time and dialed Margaret Henderson's emergency number. Margaret, it's Eleanor Matthews. I've been thinking about our conversation today, and I want to add something to our legal strategy. I want to file a police report for elder abuse and fraud. I want to make sure David faces criminal charges as well as civil liability. Eleanor, are you sure? Once we involve law enforcement, there's no going back. Your relationship with David will be permanently destroyed. Eleanor looked around her living room one more time, at the family photos and comfortable furniture and familiar surroundings that David had decided she didn't deserve to keep. My relationship with David was destroyed the moment he decided to steal my house, she said. Now I'm just making sure he understands that there are consequences for that choice. Margaret was quiet for a moment. All right then, we'll file the police report tomorrow morning. Eleanor, I have to warn you, this is going to be the fight of your life. Good, Eleanor said, echoing Robert's earlier sentiment. It's time David learned that his mother isn't someone he can push around. As she prepared for bed that night, Eleanor felt a strange sense of peace settling over her. For the first time since Jason Webb had appeared at her door, she felt like she was moving forward instead of just reacting to David's betrayal. She had allies now, a plan, and most importantly, she had remembered who she really was, beneath the grief and shock. She was Eleanor Matthews, the woman who had raised 3 children alone after her husband died. She was the teacher who had fought the school board to get resources for her special needs students. She was the homeowner who had never missed a mortgage payment in 40 years, even when it meant eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner. David had made the mistake of confusing age with weakness, retirement with irrelevance. He was about to learn just how wrong he had been. The police report was filed on a Tuesday morning in late October, exactly 1 week after Eleanor had learned about the house sale. Detective Lisa Chen, a soft-spoken woman in her 40s who specialized in financial crimes against the elderly, took Eleanor's statement with the kind of patient attention that reminded her why she had always respected law enforcement. Mrs. Matthews, I want you to understand that elder abuse cases can be complex and time-consuming. Detective Chen explained as she reviewed Eleanor's documentation. However, based on what you've shown me, there are several elements here that concern me. The timing of the power of attorney documents, the fact that your son didn't discuss the sale with you beforehand, and especially the speed with which he completed the transaction all suggest that this wasn't about your best interests. Eleanor felt a mixture of validation and sadness. It was gratifying to have a professional confirm that David's actions were legally questionable, but heartbreaking to realize that her relationship with her eldest son had deteriorated to the point where police involvement was necessary. What happens next? Eleanor asked. I'll be conducting interviews with all the parties involved. including your son, the real estate agents, and the attorneys who handled the transaction. I'll also be looking into your son's financial situation to determine if there were personal motivations for the sale." Detective Chen closed her notepad and looked directly at Eleanor. "I have to ask, Har, you prepared for the possibility that your son could face criminal charges? Financial elder abuse is a felony, and if convicted, he could face significant jail time." Eleanor had been thinking about this question for days, and she had come to a difficult but clear conclusion. "Detective Chen, I spent 40 years teaching children that actions have consequences. If David broke the law, then he needs to face the same consequences as anyone else who breaks the law." That afternoon, Eleanor was working in her garden when she saw David's car pull into her driveway. She had been expecting this visit since filing the police report, but seeing him walk toward her front door still made her heart race with a combination of anger and grief. David looked older than his 45 years as he approached, his usually perfect appearance disheveled and his face drawn with stress. Eleanor met him at the front door but didn't invite him inside. "Mom, we need to talk," David said without preamble. "I just spent 2 hours being questioned by police about the house sale. They're treating me like I'm some kind of criminal, aren't you?" Eleanor asked quietly. David's face flushed with anger. "I'm trying to take care of you. Everything I've done has been to protect you and make sure you're safe. How does that make me a criminal? You stole my house, David. You tricked me into signing papers I didn't understand, then sold my home without my knowledge or consent. If that's not criminal, I don't know what is. I didn't steal anything." David's voice rose and Eleanor could see neighbors beginning to take notice of the confrontation. "I used legal documents that you signed to make a responsible decision about your living situation. You're 72 years old, Mom. You can't keep pretending that you're capable of managing everything on your own." Eleanor felt her own anger rising to match his. "I've been managing everything on my own for 15 years, David. I managed to raise 3 children on my own after your father died. I managed to keep this house and pay every bill and handle every crisis that came up. What exactly makes you think I suddenly became incompetent? You're living in the past." David gestured toward the house with frustration. "This place is too big for you, too expensive to maintain, too isolated from medical care. What happens when you fall down those stairs or have a heart attack and there's no one around to help you? Then I'll deal with it when it happens, just like I've dealt with everything else in my life. David, you don't get to make that decision for me. This is my life, my home, my choice." David ran his hands through his hair, and for a moment, Eleanor saw a glimpse of the little boy he had once been, frustrated and scared and trying to solve problems that were too big for him to understand. "Mom, I need you to drop the police report and the lawsuit," David said, his voice taking on a pleading tone that Eleanor hadn't heard since he was a teenager asking for forgiveness after breaking curfew. "This is destroying our family, Sarah, and Michael are barely speaking to me, and now I might lose my job if this becomes public." Eleanor studied her son's face, seeing the fear beneath his anger. "Are you in financial trouble, David?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Answer the question. Are you in debt? Did you need the money from my house sale for something other than my care?" David's silence was answer enough, but Eleanor waited until he finally spoke. "The marketing firm is restructuring. There have been layoffs, and my position isn't as secure as it used to be. But that doesn't change the fact that you need proper care and supervision. How much debt are you in, David?" "Mom, that's not how much." David's shoulders sagged in defeat. "About $60,000 in credit card debt, plus the mortgage on our house is underwater. When the firm started cutting salaries, we couldn't keep up with all the payments. There it was." The truth Eleanor had suspected but hoped wasn't real. David hadn't sold our house to protect her. He had sold it to save himself. "So you decided to steal my home equity to solve your financial problems, and you convinced yourself it was for my own good," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the pain crushing her chest. "It wasn't stealing, and it wasn't just about the money, Mom. You really do need supervised care. Maybe not today, maybe not next year, but soon. I was just trying to plan ahead by lying to me, by tricking me when I was sick and vulnerable, by selling everything I worked for without even discussing it with me first." Eleanor shook her head. "David, if you had come to me and explained your financial situation, if you had asked for help, I would have found a way to support you. But you chose deception instead of honesty, theft instead of asking for help. I knew you wouldn't understand. You would have lectured me about financial responsibility and made me feel like a failure. So instead, you made me feel like a fool. You made me feel helpless and disposable." Eleanor's voice cracked slightly. "David, I loved you enough to sacrifice everything for this family. I worked double shifts and sold preserves at farmers markets and did without so many things to make sure you and your siblings had what you needed. How could you think so little of me that you believed I wouldn't help you when you were struggling? David stared at the ground, unable to meet her eyes. I thought I could handle it. I thought if I just solved the problem quickly and quietly, everyone would be better off in the long run. Everyone except me. You mean, I'm the one who loses her home, her independence, her dignity? But as long as everyone else is better off, my feelings don't matter. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant, David, and it's exactly what you did. Eleanor stepped back toward her front door. I want you to leave now. I want you to leave my property, and I don't want you to come back unless you're here to return my house to me, Mom. Please. Can't we work this out as a family? Can't we find some kind of compromise? Eleanor looked at her eldest son, the child. She had rocked to sleep and nursed through illnesses and cheered at school plays and graduations. She tried to find some trace of the honorable man she had hoped she was raising, but all she could see was someone who had chosen expedience over integrity, someone who had decided her life was worth less than his comfort. The time for compromise was before you forged documents and sold my house, David. Now the only thing that will satisfy me is getting my home back or seeing you face the full consequences of what you've done. After David left, Eleanor called Margaret Henderson to report on the conversation. He admitted that he's in significant debt and that he needed the proceeds from your house sale. Margaret said, the satisfaction clear in her voice. That's exactly the kind of evidence we need to prove self-dealing. Combined with the police investigation, this significantly strengthens our case. Margaret, I need to ask you something hypothetical. If David were to somehow reverse the sale and return the house to me, would that affect the criminal charges? It might influence the prosecution's decision about how aggressively to pursue the case, but it wouldn't automatically make the charges disappear. Financial elder abuse is a crime against the state, not just against you personally. Even if you were satisfied with getting your house back, the district attorney might still choose to prosecute. Eleanor considered this. She wanted her house back more than anything, but she also wanted David to understand that his actions had consequences that extended beyond their family relationship. What would it take to force him to reverse the sale? Honestly, it would take the new buyers agreeing to cancel the purchase, which is extremely unlikely. They have no legal obligation to do so, and they would lose money on the transaction costs. Margaret paused. However, there might be other ways to apply pressure. If David's employer learns about the criminal investigation, that could affect his job security. If his debt situation becomes public knowledge, that could affect his credit and his ability to refinance his own mortgage. Eleanor felt a chill. At the implications of Margaret's words, she had the power to destroy David's life just as thoroughly as he had tried to destroy hers. The question was whether she wanted to use that power. That evening, Eleanor received an unexpected visitor. Sarah arrived at the front door with tears in her eyes and a determination that reminded Eleanor of herself at that age. Mom, I've been thinking about everything that's happened, and I have an idea. It might be crazy, but I think it could work. Eleanor invited her daughter in, grateful for any company that didn't involve lawyers or police officers or real estate agents. What kind of idea? Sarah pulled out her laptop and opened it on Eleanor's kitchen table. I've been researching the new buyers of the house. Their names are James and Patricia Morrison, and they're a young couple with 2 small children. They're buying this house because the elementary school district is so good. Eleanor frowned. Sarah, where are you going with this? What if we told them the truth about what happened? What if we explained that David sold the house without your knowledge or consent and asked them to consider canceling the purchase? Honey, they have no legal obligation to do that. They bought the house in good faith. Sarah's eyes lit up with excitement. But Mom, what if they wanted to do the right thing? What if they're the kind of people who would care about an elderly woman being forced out of her home by her own son? What if we appealed to their sense of justice instead of trying to force them through legal channels? Eleanor stared at her daughter, struck by the simplicity and potential power of the idea. She had been so focused on fighting David through the courts that she hadn't considered the possibility of enlisting the buyers as allies rather than viewing them as obstacles. Even if they agreed to cancel the purchase, they would lose money on the transaction. The inspection costs, the legal fees, the financing arrangements, all of that would be wasted. What if we offered to reimburse them for those costs? What if we made it clear that we're not asking them to sacrifice anything just to help right a wrong? Eleanor felt a spark of hope that she hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. Sarah, that could actually work. If the Morrisons canceled the purchase, David would be forced to return the proceeds to me, and I could get my house back without waiting months or years for the legal system to resolve everything. Exactly. And if they're decent people, they might be horrified to learn that they're unknowingly participating in elder abuse. Eleanor hugged her daughter, feeling grateful for the first time in days to have at least one child who was truly On her side, how do we approach them? Very carefully, Sarah said. We need to be honest about what happened without making them feel guilty or manipulated. We need to present the facts and let them make their own decision about what's right. They spent the next hour crafting a letter that explained the situation clearly and respectfully. Eleanor told the story of her 40 years of mortgage payments, David's deception with the power of attorney documents, and her desperate desire to remain in the home she had worked so hard to secure. Sarah added details about Eleanor's excellent health and independence, making it clear that assisted living was not medically necessary. Most importantly, they made it clear that they weren't asking the Morrisons to sacrifice anything. If they agreed to cancel the purchase, Eleanor would reimburse all their costs and ensure they weren't financially harmed by their decision to help. What if they say no? Eleanor asked as they prepared to deliver the letter. Then we're no worse off than we are right now, Sarah replied. But Mom, what if they say yes? What if there are still people in the world who care more about doing the right thing than protecting their own interests? The next morning, Eleanor and Sarah drove to the Morrisons' current address, a small apartment complex on the other side of town. Patricia Morrison answered the door, holding a toddler on her hip, her face showing the polite wariness that came from unexpected visitors. Mrs. Morrison. My name is Eleanor Matthews, and this is my daughter Sarah. We're here about the house you recently purchased on Maple Street. Patricia's expression shifted to confusion mixed with concern. Is there a problem with the house? The inspection didn't show any major issues. No, there's no problem with the house itself, Eleanor said gently. But there is a problem with how it came to be sold. Would you mind if we came in to explain? I promise we're not here to cause trouble or make demands. We just want you to know the truth about what happened. Patricia hesitated, then stepped aside to let them enter. James, she called toward the back of the apartment. Can you come out? Here, there are some people here about the house. James Morrison appeared a moment later, a tall man with kind eyes and paint stains on his work shirt. He listened carefully as Eleanor told her story, his expression growing more troubled with each detail. So your son sold your house without your permission? He asked when Eleanor finished. That's right, he used documents I signed when I was sick. Documents I believed were medical forms, to obtain power of attorney. Then he sold my home to pay off his own debts. Patricia and James exchanged a long look that seemed to communicate volumes. Finally, Patricia spoke. Mrs. Matthews, we have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. We bought your house because we want them to grow up somewhere safe and stable, with good schools and a yard to play in. She paused, shifting her toddler to her other hip. But we would never want that stability to come at the cost of someone else's security, especially not an elderly person being taken advantage of by her own family. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. Mrs. Morrison, I want you to know that I'm not asking you to sacrifice anything. If you decide to cancel the purchase, I'll reimburse every penny you've spent on inspections, legal fees, and other costs. I would never ask you to lose money to help me. James leaned forward. How much money are we talking about? Sarah consulted her notes. Based on typical transaction costs, probably around $3,000 total. And if we don't cancel the purchase, Patricia asked, what happens to you? Eleanor tried to keep her voice steady. I'll have to move to assisted living, even though I don't need that level of care. I'll lose the home I worked 40 years to pay for, and my son will benefit financially from stealing from me. The Morrisons were quiet for several minutes, and Eleanor could see them wrestling with the decision. Finally, James spoke. Mrs. Matthews, we need some time to think about this and discuss it privately. Can we call you tomorrow with our answer? Of course, Eleanor said, standing to leave. And regardless of what you decide, I want you to know how much I appreciate you listening to me and taking this seriously. As they drove home, Sarah reached over and squeezed Eleanor's hand. Mom, I think they're going to say yes. Did you see how upset they looked when you talked about David using your illness against you? Eleanor wanted to share her daughter's optimism, but she had learned not to count on other people's kindness. Still, for the first time since this ordeal began, she felt like she had some control over the outcome. That evening, David called her. Again, Mom, I heard you went to see the people who bought the house. What the hell do you think you're doing? I'm trying to get my home back, Eleanor replied calmly. Something you should have thought about before you stole it from me. You're going to ruin everything. If they cancel the purchase, I won't be able to pay off my debts. Do you want me to lose my house too? Eleanor felt a moment of something. That might have been sympathy for her son's situation, but it was quickly overwhelmed by anger at his continued selfishness. David, you created this situation when you decided to solve your financial problems by stealing from me. If there are consequences, they're consequences you earned. Mom, please. I'm begging you. I'll find another way to handle the debt. I'll get a second job, I'll sell my car, whatever it takes. Just don't ask those people to cancel the sale. It's too late for that, David. You should have thought about finding other solutions before you betrayed my trust." Eleanor paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. You know what the really tragic part is? If you had come to me honestly and asked for help, I would have found a way to support you. I would have taken out a loan against the house, or sold some of my investments, or figured out some other solution. But you chose deception over honesty, and now we're all living with the consequences. The next afternoon, Patricia Morrison called. "Mrs. Matthews, this is Patricia Morrison. James and I have made our decision." Eleanor's heart pounded as she waited for the answer that would determine her future. "We're going to cancel the purchase," Patricia continued. "We'll contact our real estate agent today to begin the cancellation process." Eleanor sank into a chair, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude. "Mrs. Morrison, I can't thank you enough. I promise I'll reimburse every penny of your costs. Mrs. Matthews, we've been talking about it, and we don't want you to pay us back. We're not wealthy people, but we're not desperate either. $3,000 won't ruin us, and keeping your home means everything to you." Eleanor began crying. Unable to speak through her gratitude, "There is one thing we'd like to ask," Patricia continued. "When we have children old enough for school, would it be all right if we looked for a house in your neighborhood? We really do love that area, and it sounds like you're the kind of neighbor we'd want our kids to know. You would be welcome any time." Eleanor managed to say through her tears, "And Mrs. Morrison, thank you for restoring my faith in human decency." After they hung up, Eleanor called Margaret Henderson with the news. "Eleanor, this is incredible. If the Morrisons canceled the purchase, the sale proceeds will have to be returned, and you'll get your house back automatically. David will have no choice in the matter." "What about the criminal charges?" "That's up to the district attorney, but I suspect they'll still pursue the case. David committed a crime regardless of whether his victims ultimately recovered their losses. And frankly, this outcome actually strengthens the prosecution's case because it proves that the sale was illegitimate." Eleanor felt a complex mixture of triumph and sadness. She was getting her house back, but the cost had been enormous. Her relationship with David might never recover, and even if the criminal charges were dropped, the whole family would have to find a way to move forward after such a fundamental betrayal of trust. But as she looked around her living room, at the furniture she and Robert had chosen together and the photos that chronicled a lifetime of love and loss, Eleanor knew she had made the right choice. Some things were worth fighting for, no matter how difficult the battle became. Her home was one of those things. Her dignity was another, and most importantly, the principle that elderly people deserved to be treated with respect and honesty by their own children was worth defending. Regardless of the personal cost, David called her that evening, his voice raw with emotion. "Mom, I just heard from my real estate agent. The Morrisons are canceling the purchase. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I've gotten my house back," Eleanor replied. "Just like I told you I would. I'm going to lose everything now. My house, my job, probably my family too. Was your revenge worth destroying my life?" Eleanor considered the question seriously before answering. "David, this was never about revenge. This was about justice. You stole from me, and now you're facing the consequences of that choice. If you lose everything, it's because you gambled. Everything on a plan that required deceiving and betraying your own mother. I was trying to help you." "No, you were trying to help yourself. And David, that's the saddest part of all of this. If you had come to me honestly, if you had treated me like a person whose opinions and feelings mattered, we could have found a solution that helped everyone. Instead, you chose to see me as an obstacle to overcome rather than a mother who loved you." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Is there any way back from this, Mom? Any way to fix what I've broken?" Eleanor thought about the question, feeling the weight of 45 years of motherhood and the pain of the last 2 weeks. "I don't know, David. I honestly don't know. But I can tell you this. If there is a way back, it starts with you taking full responsibility for what you've done and finding a way to make amends that doesn't require me to sacrifice my home or my dignity." After they hung up, Eleanor sat in her quiet house, listening to the familiar sounds that had comforted her for so many years. Tomorrow, she would start the process of making this place truly hers again. She would change the locks, update her will, and make sure that no one could ever again threaten her security without her knowledge and consent. But tonight, she would simply be grateful. Grateful for daughters who stood by her, for strangers who chose kindness over convenience, for lawyers who fought for justice, and for her own stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Gracefully, Eleanor Matthews had learned something important over the past 2 weeks. She was stronger than she had known, braver than she had imagined, and more capable of fighting for what mattered than anyone, including herself, had realized. Her son had tried to take away her home, but in the process he had given her something else, the knowledge that she could face any challenge and emerge victorious. as long as she refused to give up on herself. 3 months after the Morrisons canceled their purchase, Eleanor's house was truly hers again. The legal proceedings were still ongoing. Detective Chen had built a strong case for elder abuse, and the district attorney was pursuing criminal charges despite David's return of the sale proceeds. But Eleanor had her home back, her independence restored, and something she hadn't expected: a renewed sense of purpose. The experience had changed her in ways she was still discovering. Where once she had been content with the quiet routine of retirement, she now felt driven to use her hard-won wisdom to help others facing similar challenges. Margaret Henderson had referred 3 other elderly clients to Eleanor, people whose adult children were pressuring them to sell their homes or move to assisted living against their wishes. Eleanor had become an unofficial advocate, helping these clients understand their rights and options before making decisions they might regret. She had learned to spot the warning signs of financial manipulation and family coercion, and she wasn't shy about sharing that knowledge with anyone who needed it. On this particular February morning, Eleanor was preparing for a speaking engagement. At the Cincinnati Senior Center, she had been invited to talk about protecting against elder abuse, and she was nervous about addressing such a large group. But she had learned that her story had power, and if sharing it could help even one person avoid what she had gone through, the discomfort would be worth it. As she reviewed her notes over breakfast, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw a familiar face that still caused her heart to skip with a mixture of love and pain. David stood on her front porch, looking older and more worn than she remembered. The criminal trial was scheduled to begin in 6 weeks, and Eleanor knew from Sarah that the stress was taking a toll on her eldest son. He had managed to keep his job, though his position at the marketing firm remained precarious. His marriage was strained, his relationship with his siblings was complicated, and his financial situation remained dire despite the return of Eleanor's house sale proceeds. Eleanor opened the door, but didn't invite him inside. They had spoken only once since the sale was reversed, a brief and painful conversation that had resolved nothing. "Hello, David." "Hi, Mom. I know you probably don't want to see me, but I needed to talk to you before the trial starts." Eleanor studied her son's face, seeing genuine remorse there for the first time since this ordeal began. "What did you want?" "To say I wanted to apologize, really apologize, not just try to justify what I did or minimize the damage." David's voice was steady, but Eleanor could see the effort it took for him to maintain his composure. "I've been going to therapy, trying to understand how I convinced myself that stealing from you was somehow the right thing to do." Eleanor waited, unsure whether this was genuine repentance or another attempt at manipulation. "The therapist helped me see that I was never really concerned about your welfare," David continued. "I was concerned about my own anxiety about your aging, my own fear of having to be responsible for your care, my own guilt about not being more involved in your life. When my financial problems got worse, it became easy to convince myself that solving both problems at once was somehow noble." Eleanor felt something inside her chest begin to loosen slightly. This was the first time David had acknowledged the full scope of his selfishness. "I also wanted you to know that I'm not going to fight the criminal charges. My lawyer thinks he can get them reduced to a misdemeanor if I plead guilty and agree to community service. But I'm not going to take that deal." Eleanor frowned. "Why?" "Not because what I did was a felony and I need to face the full consequences of that choice. I need to accept whatever sentence the judge decides is appropriate, even if that means jail time." Eleanor stared at her son, seeing something in his expression that reminded her of the boy he had been before ambition and financial pressure had corrupted his judgment. "David, I appreciate the apology and I'm glad you're taking responsibility for your actions. But why are you telling me this? What do you want from me?" David was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I want to know if there's any chance that someday, maybe years from now, you might be able to forgive me. Not forget what I did, not pretend it didn't happen, but maybe find a way to have some kind of relationship again." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. The question she had been avoiding for months was finally in the open. Could she forgive the unforgivable? Could she find a way to love her son again after he had betrayed her so completely? "I don't know, David," she said honestly. "I want to forgive you because carrying this anger is exhausting and painful. But I don't know if I can trust you again. And without trust, I don't know what kind of relationship we could have." David nodded, accepting her honesty without argument. "I understand. I just wanted you to know that I'm going to spend whatever time I have left trying to become the kind of person who deserves your forgiveness, even if I never actually receive it." After David left, Eleanor sat in her kitchen thinking about forgiveness and justice, about the difference between accepting an apology and rebuilding a relationship. She was still pondering these questions when Sarah arrived for their weekly lunch date. You look thoughtful today, Sarah observed, as she helped Eleanor prepare sandwiches. Everything okay? Eleanor told her daughter about David's visit and his decision to accept full responsibility for the criminal charges. How do you feel about that? Sarah asked. Conflicted, Eleanor admitted. Part of me is glad that he's finally taking full responsibility for what he did, but part of me is terrified that he's going to go to prison and that our family will never recover from all of this. Sarah was quiet while she considered this. Mom, can I ask you something? If David had come to you 3 months ago and confessed what he had done, if he had apologized then and tried to make things right, would you have pressed charges? Eleanor thought about the question seriously. I honestly don't know. Maybe not. If he had been genuinely remorseful and had found a way to reverse the sale immediately, so the fact that he's taking responsibility now, even though it's late, has to count for something, right? Eleanor looked at her daughter, recognizing the hope in her voice. Sarah wanted the family to heal, wanted to find a way back to some version of the closeness they had once shared. Eleanor wanted that too, but she wasn't sure it was possible. Sarah, even if I can eventually forgive David, I don't know if I can ever trust him again. How do you have a relationship with someone you love but can't trust? I don't know, Sarah admitted, but, Mom, maybe trust can be rebuilt over time if someone consistently demonstrates that they've changed. That afternoon, Eleanor gave her presentation at the senior center to a room full of elderly people and their adult children. She told her story simply and directly, focusing on the warning signs she had missed and the resources that had helped. Her fight back. After her talk, she was approached by a woman in her 70s named Helen Garcia, whose son had been pressuring her to sell her condominium and move in with his family. Mrs. Matthews, everything you described sounds so familiar, Helen said, her voice shaking slightly. My son keeps telling me that I can't manage on my own anymore, but I feel fine. I drive, I cook, I take care of myself. I don't understand why he thinks I need supervision. Eleanor spent an hour talking with Helen, helping her identify the difference between legitimate safety concerns and manipulative pressure tactics. By the end of their conversation, Helen had decided to schedule an independent evaluation of her physical and mental capabilities to get objective documentation of her competence. If the evaluation shows that I really do need more support, then I'll consider my options, Helen said. But if it shows that I'm capable of living independently, then I'll have evidence to counter my son's claims. Eleanor felt a surge of satisfaction as Helen walked away with a clearer sense of her rights and options. This was why she had started speaking publicly about her experience, to help other elderly people avoid being victimized by well-meaning but misguided family members. Over the following weeks, Eleanor received calls and letters from people who had heard her speak or had been referred to her by others. She found herself becoming part of an informal network of elderly advocates, people who understood that age didn't automatically equal incompetence and who were willing to fight to maintain their independence and dignity. The criminal trial began in March, on a cold Tuesday morning that reminded Eleanor of the day she had first learned about the house sale. She sat in the courtroom with Sarah and Michael, watching as David pled guilty to felony financial elder abuse and threw himself on the mercy of the court. The prosecutor, a young woman named Lisa Park, presented a clear and damning case about David's deception and theft. She emphasized the vulnerability of elderly victims and the particular cruelty involved when the abuse came from a trusted family member. David's lawyer offered a brief statement about his client's remorse and his commitment to making amends. But he didn't try to minimize the seriousness of the crime. When Judge Patricia Williams asked David if he had anything to say before sentencing, he stood and looked directly at Eleanor. Your Honor, I want to state clearly that I am guilty of everything I've been charged with. I deceived my mother when she was vulnerable. I stole her home and her security. And I caused immeasurable pain to someone who deserved only love and respect from me. David's voice was steady, but Eleanor could see his hands shaking. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't deserve leniency. I just want to accept responsibility for what I've done and begin the process of trying to make amends. Judge Williams sentenced David to 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of probation and 500 hours of community service with elderly advocacy organizations. She also ordered him to pay restitution for Eleanor's legal fees and emotional damages, though Eleanor had already decided to waive that requirement as they left the courthouse. Eleanor felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Justice had been served, but at a cost that would affect her entire family for years to come. That evening, Eleanor received an unexpected phone call from Patricia Morrison. Mrs. Matthews, I hope you don't mind me calling. I just wanted to see how you were doing and let you know that we found a wonderful house just 2 blocks away from you. Eleanor smiled for the first time in days. I'm so glad to hear that. How are the children adjusting to the new neighborhood? They love it. And Mrs. Matthews, I wanted you to know that what you went through and the way you handled it has been an inspiration to James and me. We've started volunteering with an organization that helps elderly people navigate legal and financial issues. Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest. That's wonderful, Patricia. It sounds like something good has come out of all this pain. More than you know, Patricia replied. Mrs. Matthews, you showed us that ordinary people can stand up to injustice and win, even when the odds seem impossible. That's a lesson we want to pass on to our children. After they hung up, Eleanor sat in her living room thinking about legacy and redemption, about the unexpected ways that pain could transform into purpose. She had lost a son, at least temporarily, but she had gained something else, the knowledge that her experience could help protect other vulnerable people from similar betrayals. 6 months later, Eleanor was invited to testify before the Ohio State Legislature about proposed reforms to power of attorney laws. She spoke passionately about the need for stronger safeguards to prevent financial abuse of elderly people, particularly by family members who exploited their positions of trust. Senators, the most dangerous predators are often the ones who claim to love us most, Eleanor told the committee. When an adult child abuses power of attorney, they steal more than money or property. They steal their parents' sense of security, their faith in family, and their belief that the people they raised and sacrificed for will protect them in their vulnerable years. The legislation passed unanimously, creating new requirements for documentation and oversight when power of attorney was used to make major financial decisions involving elderly principals. As Eleanor walked out of the State House that day, she felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with revenge or victory. She had taken her pain and transformed it into protection for others. She had used her experience to make the world a little bit safer for vulnerable people. David had served 8 months of his sentence when he wrote Eleanor his first letter from prison. It was a simple note, asking nothing and offering only an update on his life and his continued work toward becoming a better person. Eleanor read the letter 3 times before putting it away in her desk drawer. She wasn't ready to respond yet, but she didn't throw it away either. Maybe someday, when enough time had passed and enough healing had occurred, there would be a path back to some kind of relationship with her eldest son. But even if that day never came, Eleanor knew she would be all right. She had learned that she was stronger than she had ever imagined, braver than she had thought possible, and more capable of creating meaning from suffering than she had realized. At 73, Eleanor Matthews was building a new life on the foundation of the old one. Her house was still her sanctuary, but now it was also her headquarters for advocacy work that gave her days purpose and meaning. Her family was smaller and more complicated than it had once been, but the relationships that remained were built on honesty and mutual respect, rather than obligation and assumption. Most importantly, Eleanor had learned that age was not a surrender of power but a different kind of strength. She had learned that retirement was not the end of her usefulness, but the beginning of a new chapter in which her accumulated wisdom could serve purposes she had never imagined. On a warm evening in late spring, Eleanor sat on her front porch watching the sunset paint her neighborhood in golden light. Tomorrow, she would speak to another group of elderly people about protecting themselves from financial abuse. Next week, she would testify in a case similar to her own, helping another victim seek justice. But tonight, she would simply sit in the peace of her own home, surrounded by the memories and dreams that made this place sacred. She had fought for the right to remain here, and she had won. More than that, she had discovered that fighting for what mattered most had revealed strengths she never knew she possessed. Eleanor Matthews had learned that sometimes the most important battles were fought not for victory, but for the right to determine your own destiny. She had learned that dignity was not something that could be taken away, but something that had to be surrendered, and she had learned that she was not someone who would ever surrender anything that easily. Again, as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Eleanor smiled and went inside her house, her home. Her victory, her foundation for whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. She had proven to herself and everyone around her that age was not weakness. Retirement was not irrelevance, and a mother's love did not require accepting a child's betrayal. She had won more than just her house back. She had won herself back, and that was a victory that no one could ever take away.